Chapter 351 Spiritual Sword Sanctuary 2. Moyong Hak, the eldest son of the Moyong family, sighed as if frustrated and whispered to Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect. Hugh, this is quite troublesome. To think we still haven't met the most likely suspect. Amit Ba. Patron Moyong. There are many eyes and ears here. We should refrain from speaking. Zhang Myong Sa put her hands together and quietly advised. They were currently on the path leading to the rear garden of the guest hall in Sword Dance Courtyard, at the heart of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. Besides the craftsmen of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, there were many guests from the martial world here. Even just those strolling in the rear garden numbered nearly 30. They all wore swords at their waists or on their backs as they were both swordsmen and sword experts. The gazes of these people towards Moyong Hak and the Righteous Alliance warriors were not particularly friendly. The reason was simple. These are people who respect Master O. Don't provoke them with careless words. Ahem. I understand. At the guest hall manager's answer, the two decided to go to the sword discussion hall. In fact, most of the guests at Spiritual Sword Sanctuary stayed at the sword discussion hall rather than the guest hall of Sword Dance Courtyard, except during meal times. It was a place where they could discuss swords and where Master O's tests took place. Meanwhile, at the same time, southwest side of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary's estate, a couple was wandering around not far from the manor's entrance. They were Mok Jiongun and Yi Songa, the granddaughter of the Holy Fire Priestess. Unlike Mok Jiongun, who was walking casually and peacefully, Yi Songa's eyes were constantly moving, scanning their surroundings. Is this really okay? She was inwardly extremely anxious and nervous. This was because they had essentially trespassed into this place without permission. Mok Jiongun, with his keen sense of chi, had identified a position with almost no people and jumped over the wall while carrying her. Ugh. What if we get caught? Mok Jiongun was certain that the one who subdued and took away Oh Yinhua, who could be considered her lover, was either his brother or from the same school. If his guess was correct, they certainly needed to enter this place. However, she didn't expect him to choose to sneak in like this. Is it really okay to sneak in like this? Would you prefer we tell them we've come to find something called a sacred orb and enter? That wasn't possible. From what she had heard from Oh Yinhua, his brothers and most people at Spiritual Sword Sanctuary disliked the Fire Faith Order, considering it a heretical cult that deceived people. So while she expected they would enter with hidden identities, this was too bold. What if they encountered the craftsmen or warriors of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary? Since they didn't enter officially, they wouldn't even have an excuse, right? Step. Have you been here before? No. I should have asked that first. Why do you say that? It would have been easier to move alone. Mok Jiongun was the type not to mince words when saying something wasn't helpful. Though she felt a bit hurt, constantly being treated like luggage when she wanted to be acknowledged, she tried her best not to show it. To the right. Mok Jiongun moved his steps as she indicated. The strange thing was that when they moved where Mok Jiongun directed, they didn't encounter anyone. However, no matter how much they tried to avoid others, since the manor wasn't as large as the Imperial Palace or the Heaven and Earth Society, they eventually couldn't avoid encountering someone. Yi Song, very tense, said as she heard footsteps approaching from the opposite direction. Shouldn't we go the other way? No. We'll have to ask someone anyway, so this is good timing. What? Ask. Just then someone appeared from the opposite direction. He looked like a craftsman of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, a man with dark tanned skin covered in burn marks. While she was tense and stiff in contrast. Step. The man approached where they were without any particular reaction, intending to pass by with a light bow. Huh. Could it be? Does he think they're guests? Otherwise, there's no way he would try to pass by so nonchalantly. But then Mok Jiongun called out to him. Excuse me. At this, the craftsman stopped and turned his head. Mok Jiongun said to him. Where should we go to see Master O's youngest son? You mean young Master Yinhua? Yes. Why do you want to see young Master Yinhua? The craftsman, who had shown no particular reaction until now, asked with furrowed brows. At that moment Yi Songa hurriedly interjected. We heard that unlike the other young masters, he's young and handsome, but we haven't been able to see him at all. By goodness. At her words, the craftsman reacted as if it was such a trivial reason. At this, she glanced at Mok Jiongun with a look that said, Wasn't that at least somewhat helpful? Of course, Mok Jung-un didn't seem to care at all and didn't even look at her. Then the craftsman shook his head and said, I don't know how long you guests will be staying, but it will be difficult to see the youngest young master for a while. So don't get your hopes up. What? Why is that? That's an internal matter of our manor, so I can't tell you guests. As he flatly refused, she didn't know what to do. From the craftsman's reaction, it was clear that something had happened, but there was no way they would willingly tell them about it. Then I'll be on my way. The craftsman was about to continue on his way. At that moment, Mok Jae-un called out to him. Our conversation isn't over yet. Why are you doing this again? The craftsman turned his head with a somewhat annoyed expression. Then Mok Jae-un suddenly stretched his hand towards him. Suk? The craftsman asked, bewildered. What are you doing? Before he could finish speaking, Mok Jae-un lightly flicked his finger, and the craftsman's expression became blank before his eyes glazed over. Mok Jae-un smiled at him and said, Please tell us where the youngest young master is. The youngest young master is imprisoned in the underground cell of Jile Hall. At this answer, Yi Song-a looked at Mok Jae-un with wide eyes. What on earth did he do to make him answer so obediently? Inside young master Oh Woong-hwang's room, someone was searching for something there, suppressing their presence. It was none other than Oh Yinhwa. Why was he, who should have been locked in the underground cell of Jile Hall, searching a room without its owner? It was to find the sacred orb of the Fire Faith Order. Where on earth is it? Thanks to the wire he had hidden, he had managed to undo his restraints and escape from the cell. But when he came to Oh Woong-hwang's room to find the orb, he couldn't find it despite searching everywhere from the study to the desk and bed. Oh Woong-hwang disliked carrying cumbersome things, so he didn't even wear accessories, let alone carry unnecessary items. So he thought it would naturally be in the room, but he was perplexed. Could it be? Contrary to expectations, he was carrying it around. There was no way to retrieve it. He would be furious just knowing that he had escaped from the cell, so what could he do? As he was contemplating this, creak. Oh. At that moment the closed door opened. There wasn't even a presence approaching the door, so he had no time to hide anywhere. The person who appeared as the door opened was. I told you to reflect, yet you were here. It was young Master Oh Woong-hwang. Oh Yinhwa's expression froze as their eyes met. Usually at this time he would be at the sword discussion hall, so this was a completely unexpected situation. Oh Woong-hwang approached the flustered Oh Yinhwa and said, I came to check if you were eating properly, but to think you came out like a rat and headed to my room. He had been furious when he went to the cell and found Oh Yinhwa missing. Then, remembering how Oh Yinhwa had been particularly obsessed with that orb, he came to his room suppressing his presence just in case. And sure enough, he was searching the room like this. This won't end with just locking you up. Brother. Even though we're half-brothers, I didn't want to be too harsh because we share the same blood, but you've brought all this upon yourself. Jirit. Under Oh Woong-hwang's tremendous aura, Oh Yinhwa's skin stung. Oh Woong-hwang was the greatest swordsman in Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, second only to their father, Master Oh Kyeonmu. Naturally, not only his sword skills but also his inner force was immensely profound, comparable to the elders of the 9 sects in one clan. I'll have to break those 2 legs of yours so you won't think of escaping again. Step. As Oh Woong-hwang's footsteps drew closer, Oh Yinhwa felt suffocated. He could now understand how much Oh Woong-hwang had been holding back when they desperately fought in the cave. No, he hadn't even used 30% of his skill against him. Damn it. I couldn't even find the orb. If he was imprisoned again, he wouldn't be able to face her. But then, flinch. Oh Woong-hwang, who had been walking forward emitting a terrifying aura, suddenly stopped in his tracks. There was still about 9 steps distance between them. But why did he stop? As Oh Yinhwa was wondering, Oh Woong-hwang furrowed his brows and spoke. Who might you be? You. Who on earth was he talking to? Then a shadow flickered at the entrance and a figure appeared. The moment that figure's shadow covered the room, Oh Yinhwa's eyes shook wildly. It was only for an instant, but it felt as if the entire room was being engulfed in darkness. Oh Woong-hwang's aura was already so strong that it was hard to breathe, but this made that seem laughable. In an instant his face was covered in cold sweat. But it seemed he wasn't the only one feeling this way. Drip. At the sound that rang in his ears, he looked forward and saw a drop of water on the floor where Oh Woong Huang was standing. Naturally looking up, he saw that Oh Woong Huang's face was also beaded with sweat. His eyes, caught from behind, were filled with extreme tension. This can't be. He had never seen this before. Had his brother ever shown such fear of someone except for their father? As he was marveling at this, a voice was heard. Quite wise. I advise you to stay still. Though the words were spoken politely, the pressure and arrogance in that voice made Oh Woong Huang's expression distort greatly, as if he felt deeply insulted. However, seemingly not caring about this at all, the voice said, "Is that person Oh Yinwo?" "Yes, it is." At the familiar voice, Oh Yinwo's eyes widened. As he was thinking, could it be, the face he had been longing for so much was approaching him? Songya. It was Yi Songa, the granddaughter of the Holy Fire Priestess. Chapter 352, Spiritual Sword Sanctuary 3. Yinwo. The eyes of Yi Songa, the granddaughter of the Holy Fire Priestess, turned red. She had been desperately missing Oh Yinwo during their time apart. The same was true for Oh Yinwo. Songya. The moment he saw her, he felt a sting in his nose. He had believed that the only way to hide and protect the sacred orb from the imperial palace and various enemies was within the domain of his family, Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. However, as things had become complicated, he had been afraid of disappointing her, and now seeing her like this, all sorts of emotions arose simultaneously. Songa. Quack. As Oh Yinwo tried to say something, Yi Songa hugged him tightly. Then she whispered soothingly, "It's okay. It's all right, so you don't need to blame yourself." Songa. Oh Yinwo's voice choked up. Where else could he find such a woman? Apart from the order, meeting her had been such a blessing for him. As they were like this, someone's voice interrupted their reunion. "I understand you're happy to see each other, but let's ask if he's found the sacred orb." The owner of the voice was none other than Mok Jiangan. Seeing him, Oh Yinwo cautiously asked with a puzzled look. "Songa. Who exactly is that person?" At that question, Yi Songa whispered in his ear. "It's him. Him. The owner of the holy fire." At those words, Oh Yinwo's eyes widened. He had guessed from the tremendous pressure that this person was no ordinary individual, but he never imagined that this man could be the one from the prophecy. But now that he knew his identity, his heart began to race madly. Although he had joined the Fire Faith Order, he had inwardly been half skeptical about his existence. However, hearing the confident voice of Yi Songa, who could essentially be called the new Holy Fire Priestess, and directly experiencing this pressure, he couldn't suppress the overwhelming feeling. Is it really true? Yes. He's the one we've been waiting for. Hugh. At that moment, hearing a shallow sigh from behind, Yi Songa startled and hurriedly asked him, "Did you find the sacred orb?" "No. My brother took it, but it's not here." "It's not here. My brother will know where the sacred orb is." With those words, Oh Yinwo looked at Oh Woong Huang, the eldest son and young master of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, who was slowly gathering his energy in a highly tense state. At his gaze, Oh Woong Huang parted his lips. "Are they your companions? Where is it? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. The sacred orb you took from me. Where have you put it?" At this question, Oh Woong Huang's eyes narrowed. The strange orb with a brilliant light. Yinwo had clearly called it a sacred orb, and every night he would leave the manor to bow before that orb, reciting some doctrine about a sacred fire or something. Seeing that even such a formidable expert had appeared to search for it, it was clear that this object was undoubtedly important to the Fire Faith Order. If I were to just hand over such an item, who knows how they might react? And this brat surely. Oh Woong Huang looked at Oh Yinwo's face and suddenly remembered something. Come to think of it, it was an incredible coincidence. Wasn't the Righteous Alliance already looking for the real culprit who massacred Namgung Jin, the Skyward Swordless, and the elites of the Namgung family? The reason why his father, Master Oh Qianmu, was included as a suspect despite not being a blade user was that he was the only one with the martial prowess capable of killing them all. But the tremendous pressure felt from behind was at a level that could only be felt from his father. At this, Oh Woong Huang spoke with a confident voice. "It was you. You were the one who killed the head of the Namgung family and their elites." He was certain that the real culprit was the person behind him. At his words, Yanwo snorted as if exasperated and said, "Don't say such nonsense and tell us where the sacred orb is." "I cannot tell you." "What? Do you think I would carelessly hand over such an important object after you've killed the head of the Namgung family and their elites, putting our family in crisis?" As he spoke, young Master Wung Huang was thinking hard. Just from the pressure felt from behind, he vaguely understood that this unknown person was a level above him in skill. Naturally, if they were to fight, the chances of losing were extremely high. However, if he were to fight with such a peerless expert, the repercussions would certainly be great, and many high-level experts within Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, including his father Master Qianmu, would notice. No, he didn't even need the other experts. If just his father Qianmu noticed, the situation would be resolved. "I'm not the one at a disadvantage. Although it might be precarious right now, the longer he dragged this out, the more advantageous it would become for him." At this, Wung Huang calmly said, "I'll speak to the esteemed one behind you. This is the domain of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. Do you understand what that means?" "I wonder. What does it mean?" One of young Master Wung Huang's eyebrows raised. Is this person deliberately acting this way? This is also the domain of Qianmu, the supreme spirit sword craftsman, one of the 6 heavens. I understand that you are a formidable expert, but you should know how different the 6 heavens are in terms of rank. I must make him aware first. This person must also be close to a grandmaster level expert, so he should know how wide the chi sense of a peerless expert like his father is. He must prevent any rash actions. Therefore I advise you in return. It's not too late even now. Before his words could finish, if you want to test how many of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary's members I can kill before your father moves, feel free to keep talking. What? Wung Huang's eyes trembled. The opponent responded even more strongly. Normally, one would be conscious of the strongest opponent, but the person behind him was instead focused on his goal. Family members. If this person were to make up their mind, surely close to half of the family members would be sacrificed before his father could intervene. That's how dangerous this person was. Even his instincts were warning him against fighting this person. What should he do? Should he push back even harder? At that moment, Mok Jiangun shook his complex state of mind. The choice is simple. If you hand over the sacred orb and that person Yanwo, this will end quietly. If not, Spiritual Sword Sanctuary will see a lot of bloodshed, won't it? Yuduk. Wung Huang gritted his teeth. How did it come to this, that such people entered this place called the Holy Land of Swordsmanship and even resorted to threats? His anger was growing beyond reason. There was a high probability that things would go as this person said, but if that happened they would lose the real culprit who massacred the guests from the Namgung family, and his father would continue to be under suspicion. If that's the case, wouldn't it be resolved if he risked his life and held them off even for a moment with the determination to die together? Having made up his mind, Wung Huang immediately raised his half-step energy with his highest level of inner force. Pong. Along with this, a sharp energy surged from his entire body with tremendous wind pressure. Wung Huang's move was simple. After responding to the opponent's position behind him with his half-step force, Prung, he would aim for the opponent's vital points with the swift sword of his quick-draw technique. Wung Huang's sword, which left its scabbard, rushed towards the space between Mok Jiangun's eyebrows with lightning speed and exquisite precision. It was a sword path that was only possible with thousands or tens of thousands of practice repetitions. However, his sword was deflected upwards, piercing the ceiling as if it were nothing, and Mok Jiangun's sword finger was at his nape, exuding a sharp aura. Wung Huang's expression distorted. I was mistaken. He had thought that once his father arrived, the situation would be resolved. But with this one exchange he was certain. This person was already a monster comparable to the 6 heavens like his father. What was even more surprising was, to think he's this young. He didn't even seem to be of age yet, and with his beautiful appearance and features, it was a face he had never seen or heard of before. Just what is his identity? How could such a person be unknown in the martial world? As he was bewildered, Mok Jiangun smiled at him and said, You've made a bad move. How unfortunate. With those words, Mok Jiangun's left hand had already grasped his head. Thinking it was the golden locking hand technique, he hurriedly tried to strike the hand away, but Wooduk. Hyuk. At that moment, along with the sound of cracking, he felt fingers digging into his skull, and Oh Woong Huang was about to scream from the tremendous pain. Of course, that scream turned into a cough as Mok Jang-un changed his sword finger to a knife hand and struck his Adam's apple. Kiak kek kek. Towards him who was suffering, Mok Jang-un smiled coldly and whispered in his ear. If you had just given the sacred orb, this would have ended quietly, but since you escalated it, let's test how firm your resolve is. Osek. That whisper was like a devil opening the gates of hell. The Sword Discussion Hall of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary is a place where many swordsmen gather to discuss swords. The swordsmen gathered here were all renowned in the martial world and had deep expertise in swords. As it was a place where such outstanding swordsmen gathered to discuss swords, the level was beyond what ordinary swordsmen could approach. Even Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect, who was a peak transcendent expert with considerable skill in swords, couldn't help but be amazed listening to the debates they were having. Amit Ba. If it weren't for the Righteous Alliance's business, I would like to stay here for a few months to discuss swords. Any swordsman who handles swords would have the same thought as her. However, she had a job to do. It was to find the culprit who massacred the head of the Namgung family and their elites. Step. Zhang Myong Sate was walking through a cave passage along with Moyong Hak, the eldest son of the Moyong family, following Oh Woong Song, the second son of Master O. This was because Jiu and Gakko were beyond this place, not in the Sword Discussion Hall building. They had looked around most places in Spiritual Sword Sanctuary for the investigation, but this was their first time here. This passage was located behind a small waterfall in the rear garden of the Sword Discussion Hall, in a spot that wasn't easily noticeable at first glance. They didn't tell us about this place even though we didn't ask. Moyong Hak clicked his tongue inwardly. Master O's workspace was one thing, but shouldn't they have told us about a place like this? Feeling slightly uncomfortable, he finally opened his mouth. I've just learned for the first time that Spiritual Sword Sanctuary has such a secret space, even after investigating for several days. If we had known earlier, it would have been good for a smooth investigation. Ha ha ha. Unlike his hearty laughter, the content was pointing out this issue. At these words, Oh Woong Song, the second son of Master O, made a fist palm salute and said, I apologize. Like the Sword Discussion Hall, this area behind it is a place that requires concentration for tests and training even for guests, so we couldn't inform you. Please understand. As he answered so smoothly like a slippery eel, Moyong Hak inwardly clicked his tongue. He was about to say something more when, in any Amit Ba. But what is behind here that requires such concentration from the guests? Zhang Myong Sate cut off his words. It was her prescription, worried that the atmosphere would become uncomfortable if left unchecked. Ahem. Realizing her intention, Moyong Hak seemed to recognize his mistake and closed his mouth. To this, Oh Woong Song smiled and answered. It's because there's a test left by our father, I mean the master. What kind of test is it? You'll see when we get to Sword Valley. Sword Valley. Ah yes. At some point the guests started calling that place Sword Valley. Sword Valley. That sounds nice. Anyway, now that you've said that, I'm eager to see it quickly. Aside from meeting the seniors, it will be worth your expectations. Oh Woong Song said with a voice full of pride. Then Zhang Myong Sate furrowed her brow and asked, by the way, is that a night pearl in the pouch at your waist? What? What do you mean? Light is leaking from the pouch. At those words, Oh Woong Song looked at his waist with confusion. But as Zhang Myong Sate said, a faint light was indeed leaking from the pouch. What's this? Oh Woong Song's expression became strange. He had received this pouch from his older brother Oh Woong Huang. Inside the pouch was what Oh Yianhua had called a sacred orb. It's because of this thing that the brat can't come to his senses. I should melt it in the furnace right away. You're going to destroy it. What else would I do with this? Of course that's right. It's best to get rid of it for the youngest's sake too. Then may I examine it a bit before melting it? You want to examine it? Yes. It's peculiar, being neither jade nor iron, so I just want to take a look before melting it. All right. Take a look but then get rid of it. Understood. Of course he had received it partly out of pure curiosity, but the real reason he took it from his brother was that he was confident it could be quite useful since it was something Oh Yianhua treasured. But what on earth is this? How is it emitting light when it's not even a night pearl? It seems he really needs to examine it properly to see what it is. Puzzled, he didn't show it on his face and smiled at Zhang Myong-sai saying, "Ha, you have a good eye. Yes, it's a night pearl. I see. Looking at the light coming out of the pouch, we won't need torches. Yes. I often use it for that purpose." But we're outside the passage. A bright light was visible where the passage curved. Their attention shifted from the pouch to that spot. As they exited the passage, a massive cliff unfolded before their eyes. Zhang Myong-sate and Moyong-hak couldn't help but exclaim at the spectacular view of the cliff. But soon their gaze was drawn to something. It was a large stone tablet about 3 zhang tall, standing right in front of the cliff and its precipice. In front of the tablet about 20 men could be seen sitting in meditation. What's this? They were all staring intently at the large tablet, but it was unclear why they were doing so. What are they all doing over there? At Zhang Myong-sate's question, Oh Woong-sung shrugged and said, "It's the master's test and they're trying to receive his teachings." A test and teachings? They approached curiously. As they drew closer, Moyong-hak's eyes caught something engraved on the tablet. It was the phrase "Sword Way Sword Extreme" written on it. There was nothing else, but why were so many people sitting in meditation and staring intently at it? Finding this strange, he was about to say something to Zhang Myong-sate when, "Sate." Suddenly, Zhang Myong-sate had stopped, staring at the tablet's inscription with a shocked expression. "Sate." He called out once more, but Zhang Myong-sate didn't seem to hear him, not taking her eyes off the tablet for even a moment. As he was about to call her again, "Let her be." Oh Woong-sung discouraged him in a low voice. "Let her be. Elder Zhang Myong-sate is taking the master's test." "What? This is a test? What in the world is going on?" Chapter 353, Spiritual Sword Sanctuary 4. Zhang Myong-sate of the Hangshan sect looked around with a surprised face. "Where am I?" Everything around was pitch black and nothing could be seen. She was sure she had been looking at something just a moment ago, but what was happening? As she was finding this strange, prung, the sound of a sword being drawn was heard from somewhere. She turned her head towards the source of the sound. There stood an elderly man with a calm demeanor, dark skin, and burn marks visible here and there on his face, holding a sword. Seeing this, Zhang Myong-sate's eyes widened. Amit Ba. Could it be Master O? Ah. No voice came out. It felt like her thoughts were echoing in her head. Soon, rather than questioning this, she had to focus on the elderly man before her. This was because this old man was undoubtedly him. It was O Qianmu, the master of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary and one of the 6 heavens, called the pinnacle of the current martial world. How? She was sure he hadn't left his workshop yet. So why was he in front of her eyes? As she was wondering about this, pat. Suddenly, O Qianmu swung his sword towards her. This was just a light sword strike. But the moment she saw the sword thrusting towards her, her mind became complex. How can this be? Because in this single simple move she saw countless sword techniques. For her, a swordswoman, this single strike was incredibly shocking. However, her surprise was brief, and with the thought that she must block this sword aiming at her, she drew the sword at her waist. Prung. And to block this profound sword, she unleashed the 4th move of the Hangshan sect's Wall Origin 7 sword techniques. The remaining wish stopped smoothly. Chwa-chwa-kwa-chwa-chwak. Her sword gracefully traced an arc as it tried to block the incoming strike. But, hey, her 5-move sword technique couldn't withstand even this single strike and was deflected. And suddenly O Qianmu's sword thrust into the center of her chest. Puk. Key up. At that moment she clutched her chest and staggered. Zhang Myong-sate. Someone supported her. It was none other than Moyong-hak, the eldest son of the Moyong family. Pa-patron Moyong? Are you all right? What in the world? Her eyes widened. Suddenly the surroundings had brightened and O Qianmu, who had stabbed her, had disappeared from in front of her. As she was wondering what had happened, Wuxin. Her chest ached, and an incredibly profound sword intent dominated her mind. At that moment she could realize. What she had seen wasn't reality. Zhang Myong-sate's gaze turned to the large stone tablet in front of the cliff's edge. Sate. Ah. Indeed. Indeed. She kept exclaiming in admiration. At her reaction, Moyong Hak asked with an expression of incomprehension. Sate, what's going on? The one who answered this question wasn't her. Oh Wongsong, the second son of Master O, answered with a face that seemed somewhat proud. She took the master's test. Should I say that those who experience this receive his teachings in their mind's eye? Did you say mind's eye? Yes. Isn't the mind's eye literally the world of the mind that one enters when reaching a state of no self? Then, did Zhang Myong Sate enter the mind's eye after seeing the inscription on that stone tablet? At this, Moyong Hak stared intently at the words, Sword Way Sword Extreme, engraved on the stone tablet. He felt a refreshing sensation in his chest as the majestic spirit emanating from the calligraphy was transmitted. But that was all. Why? Zhang Myong Sate said she had fallen into the mind's eye after seeing that, so why was nothing happening to him? As he was wondering, Oh Wongsong smiled and said, Hoo. It doesn't work just by staring at it intently. What? The master said that to receive the sword intent engraved on the tablet, one must have at least the minimum qualifications. Minimum qualifications? Yes, it's difficult for me to express in words as my understanding is shallow, but it seems that to read the sword intent, one must have a high level of understanding of the sword as a swordsman. Yuduk. At these words from O Wongsong, Moyong Hak gritted his teeth. He was one of the 6 dragons, hailed as the best of the younger generation in the Righteous Alliance. He couldn't help but feel his pride hurt at the implication that his understanding, which he prided himself on being unmatched among his peers, was not even enough to read the sword intent left on the tablet. Not even qualified? As a blood descendant of a martial family that vied for supremacy in swordsmanship along with the Namgung family among the 7 great families, he felt ashamed. Seeing his reaction, O Wongsong inwardly sneered. In fact, despite talking about qualifications and such, Moyong Hak shouldn't feel ashamed. To reach a level where one could fall into the mind's eye just by looking at those characters inscribed by his father, one needed to have reached a considerable realm in swordsmanship. Although Moyong Hak was said to possess remarkable martial prowess worthy of being called one of the 6 dragons, it was impossible for him to have reached the realm of Zhang Myong Sate, who had attained the position of an elder in a sect. Don't feel inferior. Even among those sitting here, not many have reached the mind's eye. It's probably less than half. They too, like Moyong Hak, were sitting here with their pride shattered, hoping to gain even a fragment of insight. Of course, only a very few would gain even that small hint of insight. At that moment, Zhang Myong Sate spoke. Amit Ba. Indeed, the reputation is well deserved. I now truly understand why it's said that Master O's knowledge of swords is close to being the best in the world. We are grateful for your words. This humble monk has reached a realm I dare not approach. Zhang Myong Sate expressed her honest feelings. Although she had enthusiasm for martial arts, as a Buddhist she had no greed and thus no desire to challenge the sword intent, but through this she had gained various insights. Therefore she could understand why so many people were clinging to that stone tablet. What a pity! If that sword had been completed, it would have formed a sword intent equal to or greater than Master O's. But that didn't seem easy. The fact that it stopped at just 1 stroke in the last character meant that there was still a gap. Jerk. Blood trickled down the corner of Jui's mouth. He thrust the sword he was holding into the ground as if frustrated. Puke. Damn it. As he spat out these rough words, Gakko said, Brother Ji, you're too hasty. What do you mean by hasty? How can you so rashly challenge Master O with an incomplete sword intent? Ahem. At this rebuke he coughed awkwardly. He had nothing to say because Jui had such an impatient temperament that he couldn't resist issuing a challenge whenever he gained even a small hint of insight. It won't be long. By the time I complete my 10 swords, I will surpass that sword intent. Sigh. Isn't it too careless to name them first sword, second sword, third sword every time you complete a move? What's careless about it? The important thing is the sword intent. There's no meaning in giving grand names to the moves. But that way the sword intent becomes monotonous. Didn't I say that complexity doesn't mean it's good? Before they knew it, the two were arguing about their respective sword philosophies. The surrounding swordsmen seemed used to this as they turned back to look at the tablet, trying to enter the mind's eye again. O Wongsong shrugged and said, This happens often. The two of them have been here for so long that they're quite close. Amit Ba. Seems so. In any case, although it's regrettable to the two seniors, we'll have to interrupt to get their help. Let's do that. Young Master Moyong, please go. Flinch. At that moment, Zhang Myong Sate furrowed her brow mid-sentence. Puzzled by her attitude, Moyong Hak called out, Zhang Myong Sate? At his call, Zhang Myong Sate held out her hand, signaling him to wait, and then asked Oh Woong Song. Patron O. I apologize, but who is that person? That person? Puzzled by her question, Oh Woong Song turned his gaze in the direction she was looking. She was looking at the area where the stone tablet was. Vi and Gakko were loudly debating in front of it, but somehow, a stranger had approached their side. Because of the back view he couldn't see the face, but the reason Oh Woong Song found it strange was simple. It was because the stranger was carrying a blade at his waist. A blade. In other places having a blade wouldn't be strange. But this was Sword Valley. It was a place called the Holy Land of Swords. Only authorized swordsmen were allowed to enter here. What? How did he get in? As he was wondering, Yi and Gakko, who had been arguing, stopped and naturally turned their heads to the side. Their expressions became strange as they turned their heads. No way. Who is this person? The reason for their expressions was that no one had noticed this person approaching. He and Gakko were formidable swordsmen who prided themselves on being unmatched by anyone in Spiritual Sword Sanctuary except for the master. From their perspective, it was naturally surprising. Then the unidentified person spoke. How dare mere swords discuss the extreme? At this incredibly arrogant tone, Vi was dumbfounded. Setting aside the fact that he approached without presence, who was this guy to spout such insolent words? A blade. Then he noticed the blade at the stranger's waist. Who on earth is this guy? How did he get in here with a blade? Just as he was about to ask these questions. Hey! Flinch. At that moment Yi and Gakko simultaneously leaped backward, sensing a chillingly sharp killing intent. Simultaneously, twack, the sound of something being cut was heard. The two swordsmen who had avoided the sharp energy turned their heads to the side. Their eyes shook wildly. Hyojiajiak. Kung. Before their eyes, the stone tablet inscribed with Sword Way Sword Extreme, symbolizing the Holy Land of Swords, was splitting in half and crumbling. At this sight, all the swordsmen sitting in meditation in front of the tablet stood up, unable to hide their shock. Their eyes, which were initially filled with shock, soon turned to anger. This was the same for Jui and Gakko. Gakko, with a voice filled with anger, drew his sword and pointed it at him, saying, Churing, who are you? How dare you enter this place and commit such an act that will incur everyone's wrath? To call it everyone's wrath for cutting a tablet inscribed with sword intent of just this level? It's laughable. What? Hey. Before Gakko could finish speaking, with a flash of light his sword was split in half and fell to the ground. Chengyulang. Gakko's eyes shook wildly at this incredible single blade strike. This can't be. He hadn't even seen the blade being swung. Looking at him, a man with thick eyebrows and a strong appearance sneered and said, Only the blade can discuss the extreme. Chapter 354, Extreme Blade, 1. Meanwhile, Wuduk, Kyuyup. With 5 fingers digging into his skull, Oh Woong Huang, the young master of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, was about to roll his eyes in pain. Yi Song-a startled and turned her head away at the ferocious intent to crush his skull and kill him. At that moment, someone approached in front of Mok Jiongun, knelt down and bowed his head. Kung. It was none other than Oh Yinhua, the third son of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. Yi Song couldn't hide her bewilderment at his sudden action. Then Oh Yinhua hastily said, Please spare my brother's life. The eyes of young Master Oh Woong Huang, who was suffering in pain, shook. Did this brat just ask to spare his life? At Oh Yinhua's plea, Mok Jiongun said with an expressionless face as if surprised. I thought you were half-brothers and not on good terms. Even so, we're still brothers. Are there brothers who take their younger brother's possessions and lock him up? Although that's true, my eldest brother did it hoping I would succeed father as a craftsman. It was a good intention? Yes. So please, I'll persuade my brother to hand over the sacred orb, so please show mercy. You. At Oh Yinhua's earnest voice, Oh Woong Huang's groans ceased. Partly because the pressure from Mok Jiongun's fingers eased, but also because for the first time he understood the youngest's true feelings. He had thought the brat had gone astray because he hated them, partly due to the second brother's bullying. But seeing his sincere heart revealed in this urgent situation, he felt a pang in his heart. Then, it's touching and all, but I don't have time to consider this and that. If you don't want to die, you'll end up talking anyway. Please give me just one chance to persuade him. Oh Yin tried to crawl towards Mok Jae-un to plead. That's enough. Mok Jae-un waved his hand. At that moment, Oh Yin's body was about to be pushed back by the powerful True Qi. It was then. Haha. I'll give it to you. At that moment, young Master Oh Woong Huang spoke with difficulty. Brother. Oh Yin's eyes widened at these words. Regardless, young Master Oh Woong Huang spoke as if it wasn't because of that. The sacred orb is with my second brother. I'll get it from him and give it to you, so please, just don't touch our spiritual sword sanctuary. At those words, Mok Jae-un snorted and said, how much better it would have been if you had come out like this from the start. Just please keep your promise. With that, Mok Jae-un released his grip. Young Master Oh Woong Huang, his face wet with flowing blood, slumped to the floor and tried to catch his breath. After regulating his breathing, Oh Woong Huang spoke without looking at Oh Yinwo. You leave with them too. Brother. It's to protect our family, so don't misunderstand. At these words, Oh Yinwo's eyes reddened. Although it was due to the situation, in the end his eldest brother was letting him go, putting aside his stubbornness. Therefore he felt only gratitude mixed with apology. Young Master Oh Woong Huang staggered to his feet and said, if I don't go, my second brother won't hand over the item willingly, so I'll go with you. Let's do that. Then Oh Yinwo hastily said, please wait a moment. Why? If my brother goes out with this face, it might cause misunderstandings. Please allow me to do some first aid at least. At these words, Mok Jae-un looked at Oh Woong Huang's face. His face was covered in blood. Mok Jae-un nodded. Hurry up. With those words, Mok Jae-un left Oh Woong Huang's room. As Mok Jae-un left, the gazes between Oh Woong Huang and Oh Yinwo became strange. Was that consideration mortal? At Chong Ryong's voice ringing in his ear, Mok Jae-un replied with a puzzled look. What do you mean? I mean leaving the room. Didn't you give them a chance to resolve some emotional resentment between the brothers? I wonder. At her words, Mok Jae-un shrugged as if that wasn't the case at all. Chong Ryong silently observed him. He wasn't aware of it himself, but Mok Jae-un was gradually becoming more human. Of course he was still largely rational and cruel, but it was worlds apart from before. This meant that he was beginning to understand others' emotions. Chong Ryong felt strangely good about this change in him. Although she still wanted to deny why she felt this way, for now she didn't dislike this change. Flinch. At that moment, Mok Jae-un turned his head somewhere. Chong Ryong asked, what's wrong? Blade aura. I sense a very powerful blade aura. Blade aura? Here? Yes. That can't be. Didn't that Sangha girl or whatever say that those who cultivated weapons other than swords were forbidden even from entering the manor? Yes. But I can sense it. And it's very strong. How strong are we talking about? At least beyond the wall of walls. What? Chong Ryong couldn't hide her surprise at those words. If it's beyond the wall of walls, wouldn't that be the realm of profound, which could be called the domain of enlightened grandmasters? But if it's blade aura, could it be that Nam Jinmu bastard has tracked us all the way here? Gu Songbek, the Northern Blade King, one of the 6 heavens. He's close to being the #1 blade user in the current martial world. Nam Jinmu? It could be. If it's really him, he's incredibly persistent. Indeed. It might be better to kill him now. What? I couldn't do it then, but I might be able to now. You're not saying you'll fight him, are you? Here of all places? Chong Ryong asked in surprise. Mok Jae-un nodded and was about to move in the direction where he sensed the blade aura. He thought that if left alone it would continue to be a nuisance. But as he turned, Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed. What's this? The feeling of the blade aura was different. Although he wasn't sure due to the distance, it was different from Gu Songbek from back then. So what could it be? It was at that moment. It's not time yet, so it would be better for you to avoid it for now. At the voice coming from nearby, Paruk. Mok Jae-un's form blurred and then he appeared behind the owner of the voice. Suk. Mok Jae-un aimed his sword finger at the unidentified person's head. Exuding an aura as if he could pierce the head with sword energy at any moment, Mok Jaeongun said to him. Who are you? The reason Mok Jaeongun asked this was simple. It was because this person's aura was different from the warriors of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. The aura enveloping his entire body was something he had never felt before, and it was flowing in reverse of the normal flow. Just what is his identity? As he was wondering, the man being targeted by the sword finger at his right temple spoke with a trembling voice. It's an honor to meet you like this. Mok Jaeongun's eyes glinted with interest. This was because, judging from this man's voice, he seemed somewhat excited. Why would a person he's meeting for the first time react like this? So Mok Jaeongun asked. Do you know me? How could I not know you? Puk. Huh. As soon as those words ended, a sharp energy rose from Mok Jaeongun's sword finger and dug into the man's forehead. As the man flinched and looked bewildered, Mok Jaeongun said, Are you a tracker from the Imperial Palace? No, I'm not. Then are you from the Heaven and Earth Society? No. I have nothing to do with them. Then why do you speak as if you know me? Don't tell me. Is it the Secret Society? But then completely unexpected words came out of the man's mouth. I've come a long way to see you, Kyeonma, heavenly demon. At those words, Mok Jaeongun's eyes narrowed. He thought the man might be related to the Secret Society, but he didn't expect his new alias to be mentioned. What's going on? Has the name Kyeonma spread faster than expected? As he was wondering, the man said, You don't need to be wary. I've just come to tell you something important. Something important? I don't know what you're talking about, but I am a kind of prophet. Prophet? Mok Jaeongun furrowed his brow at those words. If he says prophet, it means someone who foresees upcoming events or the future. But now this person introduced himself as a prophet. Huh. A prophet. That's right. I guess there are many similar types in this world. What? The self-proclaimed prophet couldn't hide his bewilderment at Mok Jaeongun's reaction. He had expected some disbelief since he was talking about future events, which is why he called himself a prophet, but this reaction was even more distrustful. The flustered self-proclaimed prophet hastily said, I don't have time right now. Whether you believe me or not, this is closely related to you, no, to your descendants and even the entire martial world. Descendants? Yes. Due to an immortal being, the vast organization you will create and your descendants, no, the entire martial world will be in danger. An immortal being? Immortal means unable to die? Suddenly, a certain being flashed through Mok Jaeongun's mind. That being who seems to have existed for quite a long time. Yes. You may find it hard to believe, but does this person happen to have a third eye? A third eye? What do you mean by that? Hugh. At the man's question, Mok Jaeongun sighed, then grabbed the man's shoulders and forcibly made him kneel. Kung. Cook. After making him kneel, Mok Jaeongun whispered in his ear. I don't know where you heard the title Kyeonma, but if you don't tell me right now who sent you. Kyeonma, this is related to your future generations. That future generation talk again. You're an interesting person. Unless something special happens, I'm unlikely to have descendants. And future matters should be handled by future generations. Why are you telling me this? What? The prophet's back trembled at Mok Jaeongun's words. Let future generations handle their own affairs? It was a completely different answer from what he had expected. His mood sank. The self-proclaimed prophet thought that things might not go as he wanted. Maybe that's too much. Then should I at least give a warning? So the prophet calmed his excitement and spoke calmly. Kyeonma. My words are not lies. That person is a peerless expert pursuing the extreme of the blade, and the fact that he has appeared now means he's trying to kill you to cut off your future lineage. At those words, Mok Jaeongun snorted. You'd be better suited as a storyteller than a prophet. Someone I've never even seen suddenly trying to kill me to cut off my future lineage. It's true. That person's goal is certain. And we must prevent him from becoming immortal to cut off the tragedy of future generations. Before those words could finish, Mok Jaeongun turned the man's body. He was getting tired of the nonsensical story continuing. He didn't know where this person had heard the title Kyeonma, but it seemed he needed to find out for sure who had sent him. But then, Mok Jaeongun's eyes glinted with interest. This was because the man's attire was so bizarre. It was a peculiar outfit he had never seen even in the imperial palace. As he was looking at him quizzically for a moment, light flickered at the waist of this strange self-proclaimed prophet. Then the space around him began to warp and shake. What is this? At this strange phenomenon, Mok Jaeyoung hurriedly reached out to grab the self-proclaimed prophet. The prophet also hastily said, Kyoma, please, you must not let him obtain the true source of the spirit beasts. Pung. Before he could finish speaking, the body of the self-proclaimed prophet was sucked into the space and disappeared. Thinking it might be some kind of lightness technique, he opened his chi sense to scan the surrounding area, but he's gone. No energy could be detected at all. What was even more surprising was that when he opened the power of the 3 eyes in his right eye, there was no residual chi left at all. It had completely disappeared as if it had never existed in the first place. What on earth is going on? Mortal. What was that guy just now? I'm not sure. Could he really have been a prophet? Chapter 355, Extreme Blade 2. At the same time. Sword Valley of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. Only the blade can discuss the extreme. At the arrogant man's words, Gaku's expression hardened as his sword was cut. Like most gathered in this place called the Holy Land of Swords, he too had strong pride in swords. But the quick-draw technique this person just displayed was the essence of swiftness, unlike anything he had ever seen before. He was speechless at the single blade strike that had no unnecessary movements. Extraordinary. It wasn't even visible. This was also true for most of the swordsmen gathered in front of the split sword Wei Sword Extreme tablet. They too were shocked by this unknown person's single blade strike. Then someone shouted, "You're the one who massacred the head of the Namgung family and their elites." At that cry, everyone's gaze turned to the owner of the voice. The owner of the voice was none other than Zhang Myong Sate, an elder of the Hangshan sect and an investigator dispatched by the Righteous Alliance. The moment she saw the man's incredible blade strike, she was certain. It's him. Among the blade marks left on the dead Namgung family members, there were traces of a quick blade. As she was also an outstanding expert, she could mentally trace some of the blade moves while examining the wounds. But was this actually possible? Many of the blade marks left on the wounds were filled with strange blade moves that seemed impossible to embody with a human body. Blade moves that surpassed the limits of muscles and joints. It was judged that it would be impossible except for the chi blade technique that handles the blade with chi. But now someone appeared who could implement one of them. This meant that the real culprit of the Namgung family massacre had revealed himself. That guy killed the head of the Namgung family. Such a thing alone? The crowd stirred. The guests in Sword Valley were those who had stayed here for at least a few months. Therefore, they only knew that some incident had occurred outside Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, but didn't know exactly what had happened. But when they learned of it due to Zhang Myong Sate's cry, they couldn't help but be shocked. The head of the Namgung family was one of the top martial artists in the world, with the title of one of the 8 stars. But this person alone massacred him and the elites of the Namgung family? He's a monster. Truly, the human heart is fickle. They had been angry because he entered Sword Valley, the Holy Land of Swords, and cut Master O's tablet. But now that they knew what this person had done, their anger subsided and they were instantly gripped by tension and fear. However, someone broke the silence. "You damn bastard!" Twack. Along with the shout, a sword light flashed as a sharp aura tried to behead the arrogant blade user. It was a sword strike with tremendous momentum. However, the opponent was a monster who had single-handedly massacred the head of the Namgung family and their elites. He deflected the sword too easily. Tweryu. The one who launched the strike was instead pushed back about 6 steps. It was Jioe. Juruk. He wiped the blood flowing from the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. While everyone felt overwhelmed by the opponent's strength and didn't know what to do, Jui's eyes were blazing with anger, as if his rage had surged. The blade user showed interest in his appearance. "Have you raised your fighting spirit?" "Not bad. Not bad. Don't say such ridiculous things. They say 100 days for the blade, 1,000 days for the spear, and 10,000 days for the sword. How dare you discuss the extreme with mere blades, not knowing the depth of swords?" "Mere blades." The blade user's thick eyebrows raised. Seeing this, Gakko couldn't hide his embarrassment. How can you provoke that monster-like guy who has reached the extreme of blade pride in such a way? Suk. Then Gaku's eyes caught the blade user changing his grip on the blade handle. And the moment he changed his grip, the blade user was about to move. The target was, of course, Ji. Now. Not missing that instant, Gaku raised his strong energy with his broken sword and aimed for the blade user's back. Boom. As he aimed for the opening, the blade user, who was about to launch his body towards Ji, didn't even turn his gaze, but lightly twisted his body to avoid Gaku's sword strike imbued with sword energy. Those watching were inwardly disappointed at how easily he avoided the sword, but Gaku was a sword master comparable to the 8 stars, so he calmly executed a change in technique. Quick. As Gaku's sword trajectory bent with the change in technique, the blade user tilted his head back to avoid the first trajectory. However, the following change in technique exquisitely aimed for the vital point in the middle of the blade user's collarbone, who had tilted his head back. Everyone couldn't help but admire this exquisite move that aimed for the opponent's weak point. But then, twack. At that moment, everyone's eyes widened. The reason was simple. The swordsman thought it was impossible to avoid that change in technique with his waist and head tilted back simultaneously. But in that very posture he swung his blade and cut off Gaku's wrist. Chengyulang. Key up. Gaku, who lost his wrist, gritted his teeth and hurriedly leaped backward. He was dumbfounded. This was such an incredible monster that he was at a loss for words. How strong must his waist muscles be to create such a blade trajectory at that angle in that posture? Even if I were a high-level expert, if I had done that in that posture, my waist muscles would have ruptured. How has such a monstrous guy not been known? His martial prowess is beyond imagination. Perhaps he might be comparable to Master O Qianmu, the master of spiritual sword sanctuary and one of the 6 heavens, having reached the realm of grandmasters. Osek. But this wasn't the end. The blade user's blade, who had suddenly caught up, was about to behead him. The blade was so fast that there was no chance to avoid it. However, the guy's blade soared upward. It was Goe who deflected it. Thanks to his perfectly timed block, he could avoid losing his head. Twack. At that moment, Gaku's head was separated from his body. Gaku's expression didn't change at all, not even realizing he had died. Gaku. At Gaku's death, Jui bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. He thought it was fortunate to have blocked the blade exquisitely, but in that instant, the guy rotated his body like lightning and aimed a roundhouse kick at Gaku's neck. But due to the sharp energy generated at the tip of his foot, the neck was cut off. This guy's entire body is the blade itself. Blade itself is one. It was a realm where one could say he himself was the blade. He understood why the guy had discussed the extreme of the blade. This guy truly seemed to have reached the extreme of the blade. Although they had been bickering, when Gaku, who could be called his only match in Sword Valley, met his death so easily, Jui's fighting spirit wavered for a moment. I'll send you along too. The guy was about to catch up to him this time. But at that moment, chachachakachakakant. Someone intervened, allowing Jui to quickly regain his senses. It was Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect. Senior Ji, let's attack together. At her cry, Jui, who had come to his senses, leaped backward and then sent energy to his Yangchen point, changing direction forward. 8 swords. His sword created a net-like web trying to bind the blade user. However, the blade user blocked Zhang Myong Sate's sword moves and Jui's sword moves too easily. Chichicheki Chichin. Moreover, he was moving only his waist and right arm without taking a single step, but there seemed to be almost no limit to those movements. In an instant they exchanged about 3 moves, but in that brief moment, various parts of Zhang Myong Sate and Jui were cut by the blade, and their wounds increased. Quick. It's difficult to predict the blade's trajectory. Damn it. What kind of muscles and bones does he have? How can he move at such angles? Even joint attacks were overwhelming. At that moment, the swordsmen who had been just watching, feeling this wouldn't do, drew their swords and stepped forward. Prung. If the 2 people who could be called the strongest here were to be killed, even they might be in danger. Senior Jui will help too. Papapar. The swordsman aimed for the blade user's openings, targeting his back and sides. As the opponent was too strong to argue about the cowardice of joint attacks as righteous martial artists, no one hesitated. But it was at that moment. 8 Immortals Blade Competition. Puke. The blade user gripped his blade with both hands and struck it down towards the ground. Kwang. Chwach. At that moment, a tyrannical blade energy rose from the ground, splitting into 8 directions from where the blade was struck and soaring in all directions. This is... what? At the explosive blade energy, Jui and Zhang Maiyong Sate simultaneously raised their half-step strong energy and unleashed the best defensive techniques they could perform. 4 swords. Remaining wish stops smoothly. Zhang Maiyong Sate unleashed the 4th move of the Hangshan Sex Wall Origin 7 sword techniques. The remaining wish stops smoothly. Her remaining wish stops smoothly, which had gained insight through the Sword Wei Sword Extreme inscription, was much more solid than before. However, the power of the blade energy spreading in 8 directions was beyond imagination. The explosive force was so great that her form trying to block it was thrown backward. Pong. Ok. It was no different for Jui. He tried to fill the gaps as much as possible by rotating his sword energy, but he kept being pushed back by the strength of the blade energy. Tweruru. Hyuk. What kind of blade energy is this? He, who kept being pushed back, was only able to deflect it upward when the momentum of the blade energy weakened somewhat. Tiang. Twa. The deflected blade energy had enough power to tear the air several times. It was enough to make one's ears ring. The dust from the aftermath of his blade energy obscured the view in front of them, but there was a scent stimulating their noses. Jui's expression darkened. As he was thinking, surely not. Swaya. As the wind cleared the dust, the corpses of the torn swordsmen were visible all around. The scene in front of the cliff was terribly stained with their blood. With just one ultimate move, 8 swordsmen couldn't withstand it and lost their lives in an instant. Damn it. The swordsmen who had entered Sword Valley were each high-level experts who had reached the pinnacle stage of Transcendent Realm. To think such people were swept away by just one move like this. Jerk. Cold sweat flowed down Jui's forehead. There was no denying it. This guy was undoubtedly a peerless expert of the Grandmaster level who had reached the realm of the 6 heavens, which could be called the pinnacle of the martial world, not just comparable to it. The only counterpart in Spiritual Sword Sanctuary who could face this monster was Master O Qianmu alone. With this level of energy, Master O might have sensed it, but should we buy more time? Go. We might all die before that. He searched for someone with a darkened expression. It was O Wongsong, the second son of Master O. As far as he knew, Master O was currently in the final process of sword making, refining the sword heart. He knew that when refining the sword heart, one needed to concentrate so much that no one should disturb them, so there was a possibility that he might not sense the crisis because of that. Sojui tried to signal O Wongsong with his eyes to bring his father, Master O. But then, yo! As he was about to signal, he saw O Wongsong doing something strange. The guy was holding something and looked dazed, and that something was emitting a brilliant light. That bastard at a time like this. It was then. So that was the strange energy I felt. Come. The blade user reached out his hand towards O Wongsong and made a pulling gesture. Then, Pak. Hyuk. O Wongsong, who was standing dazed holding something shining in his hand, suddenly lifted into the air and flew towards the blade user. It was the technique of void object grasping. Oh no. Joey's expression distorted. It was an incredible coincidence. He was going to send the guy to call Master O, but what kind of variable is this? Pat. He launched his body and unleashed a sword technique along with drawing his sword towards the blade user. I shouldn't hold back. The sword he was unleashing was his own Sword Wei Sword Extreme, the 14 swords, which he had devised to break the Sword Wei Sword Extreme inscription. Although it was an incomplete sword, its principle was aimed at the Sword Extreme, so it could be called the most profound sword technique. Chwa. The blade user's eyes glinted with interest at Joey's sword technique. The blade user then released the void object grasping and turned his body to receive Joey's sword technique. Chichi-cheki-chichin. The clash of sword and blade was so intense that blue sparks flew in all directions. But it was around when he was about to unleash the 6th sword technique. What? The blade entered through a gap that even Jui himself, who had devised the sword technique, hadn't anticipated at all. Tiang. That single blade strike instantly broke through the 14 swords, not even allowing the first half to be properly unleashed. Tweryu. As the sword technique was broken, Jui's form, which took the full brunt of the aftermath, was pushed back about 5 steps. Kung. Having suffered severe internal injuries, Jui immediately knelt on one knee. Weak. He spat blood on the ground. This can't be. He was shocked when even his ultimate move, created to face Master O, was broken through so easily. Is this person truly a monster? To break through a technique he's seeing for the first time, as if knowing its weakness, before even the first half could be unleashed, was utterly despairing. Then the blade user approached him, muttering incomprehensible words. I see. I thought the sword technique seemed familiar, so it's the origin of that guy's. What nonsense is he spouting? As Jui was wondering, the blade user raised the corner of his mouth and said, So it's the sword sect? Jui's eyes shook at those words. This was because his sect was a hidden single-layer martial arts family, almost unknown to the outside world. But the name of his sect came out of the mouth of this person he was seeing for the first time. You? Who exactly? I'm lucky. Should I call this killing 2 birds with 1 stone? What are you? Before he could finish his question, Paruk. The approaching blade user's form blurred and disappeared. Along with it, as if blowing wind with his mouth, a very faint breeze was felt, and in an instant, a chilling sharp aura was felt at his neck. Osek. I. He realized something was aiming for his neck, but it was already too late. It wasn't something that could be blocked just because he knew about it. Susuzu. He felt the cold blade digging into his neck. Is this how I die? Does death approach so emptily like this? Like a fleeting dream, many things flashed through his mind in an instant as Jui closed his eyes. It was at that moment. Kyong. An intense metallic sound rang in his ears. Along with it, he heard a short groan and the sound of something being pushed back. Cube. Twerura. What's going on? He, who had accepted his death in that instant, opened his eyes in surprise. And before his eyes was an astonishing sight. He saw that monstrous blade user who hadn't moved a single step even when numerous swordsmen including himself had launched a joint attack, being pushed back nearly 10 steps. Parururu. Moreover, the blade user was gripping his blade handle with both hands for the first time, and the blade that had looked solid was trembling madly. Did Master O come? Jui's eyes widened. He naturally thought Master O had arrived. But standing in front of him was someone with a face he had never seen before. It was a person with an incredibly beautiful face. A youth. No, he didn't even look of age yet. Who on earth is this? As he was filled with questions, the blade user slowly lowered his trembling blade and revealed his face. The blade user's face, which had been so relaxed as to be almost expressionless until now, was suddenly filled with tension and excitement. The blade user opened his mouth with a highly elated expression. Kyanma, heavenly demon,